Every evening after the freight whistle died, Miriam Voss set a blue glass lantern on her porch rail and lit it for two people who would never come home. Briar Crossing had watched her do it for 3 winters. Nobody touched that lantern. Nobody asked about it anymore. Then Ellis Rourke rode into town with a torn bridle in his hand, and before winter took hold, Miriam would ask him to light it himself. Her shop stood where the plank walk ended, and the old freight road bent toward open prairie. It had once been a surveyor's office, narrow as a boxcar, with one front window, a crooked stovepipe, and a porch that faced more sky than town. Miriam had turned it into a stitching room after her husband died. Canvas, denim, worn coats, wagon covers, harness leather, shirts rubbed thin at the shoulders. Anything that could be made useful again came through her door. People in Briar Crossing respected her work. They respected her distance, too. They brought repairs in the morning, paid what she asked, and did not linger unless she invited them. She rarely did. At dusk, when the shop was swept and the needle tins were shut, Miriam carried the blue lantern outside. In good weather it sat on the porch rail. In rain or hard wind, it burned in the east window. Small flame, blue glass, same hour every night. The first year, women had asked if she needed company. The second year, they had offered prayers and bread. By the third, the town understood the lantern was not a request. It was a boundary with light inside it. Ellis Rourke learned about her by accident. He came into Pike's Mercantile on a Monday with dust on his coat and a bridle cheekpiece split nearly through at the buckle. He had been hired at the Bar W Ranch 2 weeks earlier and still carried himself like a man not expecting any place to hold him long. Agnes Pike took the leather, pinched the ruined edge, and shook her head. "Whoever patched this last used thread fit for a flour sack." Ellis gave a tired half-smile. "Can it be saved?" "Not by me." Agnes set it back on the counter. "Take it to Miriam Voss, end of the freight road. Last porch before the Prairie. She'll fix it proper." He reached for the bridle. Agnes did not let go at first. "She keeps a quiet shop," she said. "Do not mistake quiet for weakness, and do not go prying at the lantern." Ellis looked up then. Agnes released the leather. "You'll see it if you pass after dark." He went the next morning. Shop smelled of beeswax, iron filings, coffee, and oiled leather. Miriam came from the back room, wiping her hands on a cloth. She was not old, not young either, with dark hair pinned without vanity and sleeves rolled to the forearm. She took the bridle from him and looked at the split without asking a single wasted question. "This was cut by strain, not weather," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Horse pulled against a fence?" "Gatepost. Bad rope. Worse luck." She turned the leather toward the window light. 2 days, lied. 2 days, 35 cents. If the stitch fails, bring it back and keep your money. That fair? That final. Ellis nodded. He liked that answer more than he expected. When he stepped out, he noticed the lantern on the rail. By daylight, it looked ordinary except for the glass, deep blue and rubbed thin at the edges where hands had carried it often. It sat empty, waiting for dusk, like a thing with a duty. He did not ask, but he noticed. Over the next week, Ellis rode past the shop whenever ranch work sent him toward town. At evening he saw Miriam on the porch with the lantern burning beside her. She did not sew out there. She did not read. She sat with both hands still in her lap and looked down the freight road, past the grass, past the darkening cottonwoods, toward nothing any other person could see. None at the saloon had explanations for everything. They knew why a horse limped before they saw its hoof. They knew why rain failed before they saw a cloud. On Friday, they decided they knew Ellis, too. A freighter named Dobbs squinted at him over a beer and snapped his fingers. "Rourke, I know that name. You ran relay at Red Mesa." Ellis kept his eyes on the glass in front of him. Dobbs turned to the room. "This is him. There through the wash when every other rider went around. Won by half the track. Then did it again at Fort Lyle with a borrowed horse." A couple of men looked over with fresh interest. "Man rides like that," Dobbs said, not unkindly. "And he's mending fence for ranch wages?" Ellis put coins on the bar and stood. "Fence stays where you put it." He left before the laughter could decide what it wanted to be. That night, as he passed Miriam's shop, the lantern burned steady. Miriam was in her chair, shawl drawn around her shoulders, her face turned toward the road. She did not look at him. He was grateful for it. 2 days later, he returned for the bridle. The repair was better than the original work. The stitch line was tight, the buckle set clean, the leather fed and darkened so the old tear looked less like damage than a place that had learned not to break again. "You do fine work," he said. Miriam looked at him as if praise was a coin she did not know where to put. "It will hold if you oil it." He paid and left. That evening, he almost rode straight to the bunkhouse. Then he saw the porch. No lantern, no Miriam, only the shop window dark, and one thin cough from inside, sharp enough to stop his horse. Ellis sat a moment in the road. The decent thing would have been to ride on, because she had not asked for him. The cowardly thing would have been to tell himself that was the same as decency. He turned back toward town. Agnes Pike was closing her ledger when he entered. "Miriam Voss is sick," he said. "Her lantern is not lit." Agnes's face changed before the rest of her moved. She took her shawl from a peg. "How sick?" "Bad enough to be alone in the dark." Agnes blew out the counter lamp. "Then she won't be." For 3 days Agnes came and went through Miriam's back door with broth, clean sheets, and the firm mercy of a woman who knew when not to ask permission. On the 4th morning, Miriam was upright at her bench, pale and irritated by her own weakness. Agnes buttoned her coat at the door. "You can scowl at me after you finish that tea." "I told you I was managing." "You were managing to collapse." Miriam looked away. Agnes's hand rested on the latch. "Ellis Rourke came for me. Said the lantern was dark." The room went quiet around the words. Agnes did not wait for thanks. She left Miriam standing at the bench, looking toward the front window, where the blue lantern waited on the porch rail for evening. Miriam did not light it early, but when dusk came, her hand shook a little on the match. After that, Ellis passed less like a stranger. He never came to the shop without a reason. A torn rein, a glove seam, a buckle strap for another hand at the bar W. He paid, said what needed saying, and left before silence had to defend itself. That was why Miriam trusted the silence when it began to hold him too. The first real turn came on a cold afternoon, with a wind that pushed dust flat along the road. A cattle buyer stood on Miriam's porch, holding a repaired wagon cover and insisting the price had been too high. "I can get this done in Abilene for half," he said. "Then next time you should ride to Abilene," Miriam answered. He smiled without warmth. Woman alone ought not be so proud over needlework. Ellis had just come around the bend with a coil of wire on his saddle. He heard enough to stop. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at the man first. He looked at Miriam. "Everything settled here, Mrs. Voss?" The buyer turned. He took in the horse, the wire, the long, quiet man sitting easy in the saddle. Nothing in Ellis's face promised trouble. Nothing in it promised he would avoid it, either. Miriam held the man's gaze. Almost. The buyer counted the full amount into her palm and left with the cover under his arm. Ellis touched the brim of his hat and gathered his reins. "Have you eaten?" Miriam asked. Ellis touched the brim of his hat and gathered his reins. "Have you eaten?" Miriam asked. He stopped. She had not meant to ask it until after the words were already standing between them. "No, ma'am." "Stew is on the stove." He stepped down and tied his horse to the post. Inside, she set 2 bowls on the table and spoke of practical things: thread prices, an early frost, a wagon axle that had splintered by the creek. Ellis answered in the same plain way. He did not try to turn supper into a debt. He did not make a performance of not making one. Before he left, Miriam set his hat on the table near his hand. "Agnes said you were the one." He knew what she meant. She knew how to help, and you knew not to come in yourself. His hand rested on the hat brim. "I figured a closed door meant something." Miriam looked at him across the lamp glow. "It did." He nodded, as though that was all the answer a man had a right to receive. He came back the next week with a canvas packstrap. The week after, with nothing but a sack of coffee Agnes had asked him to carry, though Miriam knew perfectly well Agnes's boy could have done it. By late October, Ellis had become part of the shop's evening shape. Chair near the stove, hat on the second peg, boots kept clear of the clean cloth bundles. A man can force his way into a room loudly. Ellis seemed to arrive by subtraction, removing every demand until his presence weighed almost nothing. One night, while Miriam cut heavy canvas for a freight cover, he stood across the bench and held the folds straight. The work would have taken her an hour. With him, it took 20 minutes. When it was done, she rubbed her wrist and said, "You were famous once." His eyes lifted. "Briar Crossing is small," she said. "Men talk. Men mostly repeat." "Is it true?" He considered the window where dark reflected the room back at them. "Some of it." "You left because you lost?" "No." "Because you won?" That almost made him smile. He took his time. A crowd can make a thing stop belonging to you. First you ride because the horse needs riding. Then you ride because 50 men want to see whether you'll break your neck. After a while you cannot hear the horse over all that wanting. Miriam lowered her eyes to the canvas. She understood more than he had said. Not about horses. About something private becoming public, until there was nowhere left inside it to breathe. From then on, he stayed for coffee more often. And still, he did not ask about the lantern. The question came only when the first November cold settled hard over the prairie. They were on the porch after supper, Miriam in the chair, Ellis on the top step. The blue lantern burned on the rail between them and the empty road. The flame looked smaller in the cold. Braver, too. Ellis looked at it, then looked away. "You set it out every night." Miriam's fingers tightened in her shawl. He did not make it a question. That helped. "My husband made that lantern out of a broken store globe," she said. "Jonah could fix anything badly enough to make it work." Ellis smiled softly, but only with his eyes. "He read to our girl by that light," Miriam continued. "Ruth would fight sleep until the page blurred in front of her. Then she would lean against his side and pretend she was still listening." Her voice thinned but did not break. "Fever took them both in the same winter, 3 days apart. I put the lantern out the first evening because I did not know what else to do with my hands." The road stretched black beyond the porch. "Then the next evening came," she said, "so I did it again." Ellis sat with the truth without trying to improve it. After a long while, he said only, "I'm sorry they're gone." Miriam looked at the flame. "So am I." He stayed until the oil burned low. When he left, he moved quietly, as if sound itself might bruise the porch. A few evenings later, after supper, Miriam heard the front door open. She thought Ellis was leaving. Instead, she found him standing outside with his hat in his hand, stopped halfway between the door and the steps. The lantern was waiting on the shelf beside her. He had not touched it. "I can go," he said, "or I can sit out here while you light it." The choice was placed before her, whole, with no hand pressed against it. Miriam looked at the lantern, then at him. "Stay." He sat on the step while she lit the wick. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The town went quiet by pieces. A wagon chain, a dog, a door latch. Then only the prairie wind and the small sound of flame inside glass. That became the pattern, not every night, not as a claim, but often enough that the town noticed, and for once had the grace not to spend it. By late November, Ellis had taken permanent work at a smaller horse place north of Briar Crossing. He did not tell Miriam the first day because the news felt too large to set down casually and too tender to dress up. But she noticed the way he no longer spoke of leaving when winter came. She noticed the second peg had stopped looking borrowed. One evening, while she worked late on a set of traces, the lamp at her bench began to gutter. Without looking up, she reached for the oil tin. Ellis was closer. His hand found it on the shelf before hers did. He set it beside her and returned to his chair. Miriam kept stitching. But the room changed. It was a small thing. A man knowing where oil belonged. A man knowing the room well enough not to ask. It should not have mattered. It mattered more than anything loud could have. The next morning, Ellis came before ranch work. Frost still silvered the porch boards. Miriam was at the bench, drawing a needle through damp leather, when the door opened. He removed his hat and stood with it in both hands. She set the work down. "I have spent most of my life moving on before a place could expect me," he said. "For a long time, that suited me fine." Miriam did not speak. "I know what this house has held before me. I know I am not the first man you loved, not want to be foolish enough to ask you to set that down." His voice stayed steady, but not untouched. "I am asking if there is room for me beside it." Outside, a crow lifted from the fence and crossed the pale sky. Ellis drew a breath. "I would like to stay as your husband, Miriam, if you will have me." For a moment, the shop held its breath with them. Miriam looked at the bench, at the leather, at the thread drawn halfway through. Then she laid the needle down carefully, because some work must wait when a different kind of mending begins. She turned fully toward him, because some work must wait when a different kind of mending begins. She turned fully toward him. "Then stay." His breath left him, as if he had been carrying winter in his chest and had finally reached a warm room. That evening, Miriam closed the shop early. She swept the floor, banked the stove, and finished one small repair, because habit still needed somewhere to put itself. Ellis sat by the window, quiet as he had always been, but the quiet had changed. It was no longer the quiet of two people protecting a distance. It was the quiet of two people listening to a life approach. When dusk came, Miriam took the blue lantern from the shelf. Then she stopped. Ellis looked up, out to him. "Would you light it tonight?" He did not move at first. He understood enough to be afraid of doing it carelessly. Then he stood, took the lantern with both hands, and went out to the porch. Miriam heard the match strike, one clean scrape against the dark. The flame caught, trembled, and steadied behind the blue glass. She waited a moment before following. Ellis sat on the step below her chair, the lantern burning on the rail beside him. He had not taken Jonah's place. He had not taken Ruth's. He had not moved the grief aside to make room for himself. He had simply been trusted to sit where the light could reach him. Miriam lowered herself into the chair. The prairie lay dark beyond the porch. Briar Crossing settled into its small night sounds behind them. Somewhere a horse shifted against a stall. Somewhere a woman shut a kitchen door. The cold held still. Miriam looked at the lantern and thought of Jonah's clumsy hands fitting blue glass into a cracked frame. She thought of Ruth's head growing heavy against his shoulder. She thought of the first night after the fever, when the house had been so quiet that the match sounded like thunder. Then she looked at Ellis. He was watching the flame, not as a man admiring what he had won, but as a man keeping company with what he had been allowed to know. That was why she had asked. The lantern burned for the dead. It burned for the years she had survived by giving her grief a place to sit. And that night, for the first time, it also burned for the living. Neither of them spoke. The blue glass held the flame against the dark. And for Miriam Voss, that was enough.